Earlier this week, I returned from my second consecutive visit to Geneva for the annual Watches and Wonders show. Having had 2 really full days, I wanted to let my experience percolate before sharing my thoughts on the trade show from an insider's perspective to give you a sense of what it's like. To attend the trade part of the show, as I did, you need to be a watch industry professional or a guest of one of the brands. The show opened to the public this weekend. Thank you so much again to my friend at the Richemont Group for inviting me to attend as their guest. Richemont owns many of the exhibitor watch brands, and also to all his colleagues for making me feel so welcome too. Whilst I've seen a lot of watches this past few days, this video is less about specific novelties and new releases, although there is a bit of that in here, and it's more about my personal highlights, what I enjoyed most and my main takeaways. So if you've ever wondered what's it really like behind the scenes at Watches and Wonders, then this is for you. Last year, as a guest of our Lange & Söhne, I wore my Lange 1. This year, I chose to wear what I consider to be my favourite watch, the Odysseus, also by our Lange & Söhne. And I'll explain later, it was to be a topical choice. On my right wrist, I also wore the Vacheron Constantin, which my father gave me, another Richemont brand, in the hope that someone at Vacheron would be able to open the watch and reveal more about it to me. My father cannot recall. On arrival at Geneva Airport, I sensed a real buzz and an all-round feeling of excitement walking off the plane. You'd be forgiven for thinking that you'd already arrived at the show as you arrive at the airport. There are so many watch posters everywhere. I believe they're a semi-permanent feature. Boarding the short shuttle bus for the journey from the airport to the show, it became clear that it wasn't just me. On arrival through the main entrance, the first exhibitor in a large space on the left is Bremont. If you've followed this channel, you'll know that I am a long-time fan of the company, having bought many Bremont watches over the last decade or so. It was at this show a year ago when Bremont's CEO, Davide Serrato, first revealed the new Terra Nova and the Supermarine watch ranges. Serrato was appointed off the back of an equity investment by hedge fund manager Bill Ackman, and on the first day of this year's show, 24 hours or so before my arrival, Ackman posted on X a watch and investment story, explaining his interest in watches and his Bremont story. His post went on to say, "To date, I have been a passive investor in Bremont, but perhaps the activist in me caused me to step forward, to recently seize the opportunity to materially increase my investment in the company and become the non-executive chairman of a newly refreshed board." Importantly, Ackman also went on to say, "Bremont now has a well-capitalized, long-term major owner who would like to see Bremont become a big success and achieve its vision of returning watchmaking to the UK, and who is not looking for dividends or a liquidity event in this lifetime." That's a big statement, and it gives Bremont every opportunity to thrive and succeed. I was warmly greeted on arrival at Bremont by Andrew Haimovici, who I had briefly met some time before, and who I gather now has a seat on the company's board. Andrew walked me through the history of Bremont's aviation watches and introduced me to the new Altitude aviation line. This is an evolution of the Martin Baker MB brand, retaining some obviously recognizable features such as the triptych case, roto-click bezel, hour and minute hands, and the emergency pull handle on the seconds hand. So the watches are familiar in appearance. However, the previous incarnations have also been modified, and the new models are slightly thinner, featuring applied indices on the dial, modified lugs, barrel, and newer, more chunky crowns. The Altitude line is powered by a La Jouperet movement and is also available on a new bracelet that can be fitted directly to the lugs. If I had to choose, my pick of the new aviation watches would probably be the Altitude 39 date. I like the simplicity of this watch and the smaller case size. Being picky, I think it would benefit from a touch of colour though. It's entirely monochrome, and I'm not quite sure whether the detail around the date window is just that little bit too much. Bremont also surprised with novelties, including 2 jumping hour models. I felt this was a bit of a theme in this year's Watches and Wonders, with several brands also showcasing jumping hour models. They also have a new tourbillon model and Bremont's first perpetual calendar. Over at Vacheron Constantin, I met Sigrid and her colleague Max, who was good enough to open my watch and read the numbers engraved on its 1003 movement, so they could check their records and provide me with a bit more information on this timepiece, which I believe dates back to pre-1970. At least that was the year that the company dropped the ampersand and became simply Vacheron Constantin. Sigrid kindly gave me a tour around the Vacheron booth and talked me through their novelties, which included 3 stunning piece uniques, as well as an incredible timepiece with 41 complications, the most ever. This watch took 10 years to conceive and make, and whilst it wasn't possible to handle the watch, it appears to be practically wearable, being under 15 millimeters thick. At Lange & Söhne, the showpiece watch was their minute repeater perpetual, alongside 2 smaller 1815 watch novelties in white and pink gold 34mm cases. But for me, the watch that really caught my attention and stole the show was the Odysseus in honey gold. Try as I may, I couldn't quite capture the colour of the honey gold Odysseus with my iPhone camera. It's one of those that you really need to see in the metal to understand. It is strikingly beautiful, and I have no doubt that it will be an enormous hit, and the 100 pieces will be massively oversubscribed. Shortly before arriving at Watches and Wonders, I saw photographs of the Odysseus in honey gold, and for me, it raised an eyebrow. Initially, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I didn't expect the Odysseus in this metal. To me, the Odysseus was the self-ascribed sporty, elegant Lange, and that's partly what drew me to the Odysseus in the first place. So to move away from that positioning blurs the lines, for me anyway. It was, up until now, set aside from every other Lange in that it wasn't presented in a precious metal. Anthony de Haas, Lange's Director of Product Development, was at the bar grabbing a coffee and was momentarily alone, so we had a chat. Frankly, he looked frazzled and I really felt for him. It must be very intense for the exhibitors who have to be always on during Watches and Wonders. Anthony de Haas is the man who initially got me hooked on the Lange brand. We talked about the Odysseus in honey gold, and I explained my thinking, and that for me, it was a surprise. He confirmed that my reaction is precisely what he and the team wanted, explaining in his effervescent Dutch way that he doesn't like the word luxury, but every now and then, he said, you need to... And he paused, pretending to physically bump himself forward slightly, before continuing, to jar ever so gently. Plus, it's fun for us in the team to see the reaction, he said. Nico Leonard also happened to be looking at the Odysseus in honey gold at the same time as me, and we spoke about it. He wondered why Lange needed to limit the production to only 100 pieces. I later learned at the Lange keynote that the limited production was because honey gold is particularly difficult to work with, but that also makes it ever more scratch resistant. You can't help but be impressed by Grand Seiko, who revealed a new Spring Drive watch that they described as the most accurate wristwatch powered by a mainspring today. The first Spring Drive was released by Grand Seiko in 1999. Spring Drive movements combine the mainspring of a mechanical watch with electronic precision, and in poetic fashion that's typical of Grand Seiko, they describe the gliding hand as representing a Japanese sense of beauty and the flow of time itself. They say it captures Grand Seiko's spirit to push back boundaries and to be alive in time. Spring Drive UFA, UFA stands for ultra fine accuracy, is the most precise and also the most compact Grand Seiko model to date, being powered by the Spring Drive 9R movement in a case diameter of 37 millimeters. A perfect size for me. Usually, watch accuracy is referred to in plus or minus a few seconds per day. However, Spring Drive UFA sets entirely new standards, not being measured in accuracy per day, per week, or even per month. This watch is accurate to plus or minus 20 seconds per year. It really is state-of-the-art watchmaking. I haven't ever been all that interested in Nomos watches before. However, I found their new world timer range enchanting and so much fun. They are sadly limited editions with only 175 pieces of each iteration, and they come in a range of 6 upbeat colours, all of which have gladiator-type names: volcano, jungle, canyon, glacier, magma and dune. If, like me, these tickle your fancy, I'd get in there fast. It wasn't all super duper. There were some minor disappointments. There was a lot of talk about the Rolex Land Dweller, but unfortunately I wasn't able to get hands-on with the watch. I suspect I need a few more subscribers. Similarly, Bell and Ross have a range of 36mm beauties, but it wasn't possible for me to touch and feel. And as I was walking into Chopard, a lady asked me politely whether I had an appointment. When I explained that I didn't, and that I didn't know I needed to make one, she told me that I couldn't enter because it was by appointment only. So I did a volte-face and I left. It might be down to the language barrier, but I just wish she had offered me to find me a time slot instead. I also established that I simply don't get the Roger Dubuis brand. It really does nothing for me, except that one of my biggest wonders was how this watch manages to float like this. Watches and Wonders is a big show, and I saw many watches and in a short space of time. However, the real highlight for me, and what I enjoyed most, was seeing some friendly faces again. Alexander from Watch Advisor, the legend that is Teddy Baldassar, Andrew and Claire at Bremont, and also meeting people like Scarlett, who I learned from Claire is kind of a big deal. I caught up with Anthony Peacock from Watch Gecko, who I'd met last year, and we got on to talking about pilot watches. Anthony mentioned that he was particularly taken by a lovely quote he had read, which was about simple tool watches. He explained it was in the Longitude photograph exhibition, which is in Watches and Wonders. I'd completely missed the photograph exhibition by Fred Meurs, which happened to be right next to where we were standing, so we went inside. Meurs is a photographer who followed the Prime Meridian line from north to south, focusing on where the line crosses over terra firma, taking photographs along the way. And the quote Anthony had referred to was from an 80-year-old pilot instructor, Jean-Pierre Gossez, who underscored the importance of the Greenwich Meridian and insists his pupils fill out their flight logs using GMT. He also tells his pupils to get rid of their useless button-riddled watches and to buy a much simpler model with just 2 hands. That's how you use dead reckoning. If you fly at a certain speed for a certain amount of time in a certain direction, you will reach a certain place. Brilliant. It was wonderful to bump into Justin Hast again. Randomly, I saw him last week too. Justin is a true force for good, and he very graciously introduced me to some icons in the watch industry, including Marco from Swiss Watch Gang, Tony Trainer, formerly editor at Hodinkee and now at Unpolished, and Stephen Pulverant, also ex-Hodinkee and now Justin's partner with The Enthusiasts. I felt privileged to be invited to sit in and to watch and listen to them work, recording an Enthusiast podcast of their thoughts on the show. The person I was delighted to unexpectedly meet and then later spend the most time with, mainly because we were also on the same flight home, was the remarkable Brittany Pierce, who was attending Watches and Wonders for her first time. Brittany, also known as Watch Gringa, makes superb content on YouTube. We initially swapped watches and had an oogle at one another's timepieces. Brittany was wearing this fabulous Patek Philippe. And then we later got talking and didn't really stop. Literally just around the corner from Watches and Wonders was another watch exhibition called Time to Watches. So prior to leaving for the airport on day 2, I went to pop in. This was a much smaller and lower key event than Watches and Wonders. However, the event still managed to showcase over 70 brands, ranging from low value to high horology timepieces with price tags high enough to make your eyes water. I hadn't heard of many of these brands, and yet the quality of craftsmanship was really top-notch. I found the following to be particularly noteworthy. Crayon. This watch brand has some really high quality and unusual complications, certainly that I haven't seen before. This model has a date wheel with Saturdays and Sundays whited out, and as the months change, the whited out dates shift. It's really clever. Fears, who have just released this watch, and whilst it isn't a new release, they also have a jumping hour complication. Watchmaker James was on the Fears stand. I had met James in London some weeks ago at a Worshipful Company of Clockmakers event. And then there was Breva Watches, which was acquired by Julian Henney, and Breva has these two beauties. And then there were some very unusual watches from Zanetti, with some beautiful intricate enamel dials, backed by strong personalities. The watch industry has had a pretty tough 12 months, and by all accounts, watch sales have been less than good. Of course, some watch brands have multiple year-long waiting lists of buyers, and so they fare better than others and can smooth out the peaks and troughs. But none of the brands appear to be taking anything for granted, and it was clear that all the exhibitors showcasing in Geneva were working hard to put their best foot forward. It's just such a pity that on the back of a difficult trading year, the industry now faces more uncertainty in the form of tariffs. But that's another story altogether. For me, I felt less of an imposter and much more at home during my time at Watches and Wonders on this, my second visit. In large part, that was because of the people I came into contact with. So if you and I crossed paths and had occasion to speak, either during Watches and Wonders or indeed at the Time to Watches exhibition, even if it was only very briefly, I want to once again say thank you.